Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Productivity Mastery episode 185, meaning there's 184 episodes on your favorite podcast platform. So if you haven't subscribed already, make sure you go to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, find Productivity Mastery, and subscribe to it. Every subscription helps us to bring you even more exciting guests like my friend, my guest today, Mark Vernooij, partner at THNK. Super excited to welcome you on the podcast. Mark, how are you this morning?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm great. It's a beautiful morning. You can see the sun dripping into my office here, and I'm very excited to spend this time together and have a chat with you and the audience and everyone. Yeah.
A partner in one of the best schools when it comes to leadership in the world, and I can't wait to hear all about it. Maybe let's start from there. Mark, could you start maybe a little bit from the beginning of the story? Why was the school built? For the audience that probably haven't heard about THNK, what is THNK? What was the reason it was built in the first place?
Yeah, Think School of Leadership. We started it only 13 years ago, so that's on the one hand, it's a very long part of my career, but on the other hand, it's a very short time frame. And we launched it because we were looking around us in the world and we saw all the big problems. Today, we sometimes talk about the Sustainable Development Goals or the SDGs. Back then, we didn't have those. We had the MDGs, but nobody knew those. But we still had the same problems, right? We were looking on those problems and we were saying, hey, maybe leadership is one of the biggest levers to make a positive change in the world. And when we had that insight, we said, okay, does anybody do this? Are there institutes, global institutions in the world that are kind of building the leaders we need to create the world we want? And our analysis was that some people were doing it, some individuals here and there, but nobody really at scale and at the global quality level that we aspire to. So that was the emphasis to starting this thing is, can we create leaders, can we help leaders develop themselves in a way so that they can lead the world in a direction that is more helpful, that solves some of these big challenges.
And are we looking into business leaders or we are looking at leadership as a whole?
We're looking at leadership as a whole. So,
Mm.
as a matter of fact, there's a lot of these problems are systemic, and they require business leaders, leaders from NGOs, leaders from government, and all sorts of other leaders, and even leaders. Right? What is a leader for us? It's not a position or a title or a seat or a chair. It's not on your business card. A leader is somebody who achieves results by mobilizing others. Leadership can be done from any chair. Now we focus on the slightly more senior leaders, but still, it's a wide definition for us.
What's the difference between a regular business school? I graduated the business school. What is the difference between the approach you're taking from a business school, regular business school?
Yeah, yeah. I was also lucky enough to attend a business school, which is great, is amazing, and it's really good. It's helpful. In my business school and in most I know, there's a bunch of courses that teach you kind of the fundamentals of how business works. So they teach you how do you do strategy, how do you do marketing and sales and operations and all of that. We skip all of that. We assume that you can get that knowledge elsewhere, and we focus completely on leadership and making change happen. So leadership, you can talk about leading yourself. Who am I? And there's an everlasting journey of getting to know yourself better. And it's helpful as a leader to get to know yourself better. And we can talk about that more. Then there's leading people. So leading people or teams. So how do I interact with others, and how do I do that best? How do I do that in my own authentic way? How do I do it so that it's helpful for those people, so that they like being led by you, but also that, I mean, it's not just about like or being nice or being kind. It's also about being effective. And then how do I lead change? How do I lead an organization, a business, a part of the world in a certain direction. How do I make change happen? So that's really what we focus on. So the topics are quite different.
Mm.
What's also different is how we work. We set at the beginning a couple of rules. We said no books, no lectures, no exams, and no classrooms. So and no classroom. What I mean is the typical classroom in your, I don't know how was it your MBA, but at mine it was these big amphitheaters and people were sitting behind a desk. But this desk creates a lot of safety to hide behind, but it doesn't help to have the discussion with each other in a human way. So the way we teach is very different. It's all experiential. It's all very human. It's all in a way that it not just gives you knowledge and maybe skills, but it changes your mindset. Because we know that, I mean, knowledge nowadays is cheap or free, right? We all have the knowledge on this device. Even skill building is somewhat more accessible online. But if you change yourself and the way you look at the world or interpret the world, then your the way you handle also becomes different. So we're different both in what we teach and in how we teach.
Hmm. I've graduated in a pretty prestigious high school, and then I joined a business school, did my bachelor degree, then I did my master's in a different business school, and I gotta say, this knowledge, these skills, when it comes to self-awareness, understanding who am I had to acquire them elsewhere, not at school, but through joining different courses, seminars, workshops, reading a lot of books, coaching, mentoring, all these kind of things. Um, and I'm curious because you guys are working with a lot of more senior leaders. Do you find there is a huge gap when it comes to self awareness? What is your thoughts?
Yeah, so indeed, we're working mostly with senior leaders. So with the board and 4 levels down or so. Depends a little bit on the size of the organization. Um, I think some the most senior leaders, the people who are now board members of large organizations, so that means you're typically in your 50s or older. They grew up in a time when this was less stressed or less emphasized, right? If you grow up today, then it's then you almost get a coach when when you go to primary school, right? It's accepted. We all know we have coaches and trainings and self-awareness things, and it's acceptable to have a psychiatrist or a coach or something like that. When I grew up, going to a psychiatrist was something that you didn't tell the neighbors because they might think you're crazy. So it's different, right? And I'm 47 now. So imagine if you're 57, that's another 10 years of that change. So I don't think so. The people who have it spend real time developing that. And in busy lives, it's hard to do so, to take a lot of time out. And it's interesting, right? Our educational model is kind of built around the concept of you learn everything in the first, depending the country you're in, but like 15 to 25 years of your life. That's when all the education happens. And afterwards, you have to be lucky if you find some education, right? You have to have a company that sponsors it, or you have to start looking for it yourself. But there's no organized way. If you're 17 and you're not going to school, somebody's asking you like, why are you not going to school or university or whatever? If you're 35, nobody's asking you why you're not going to school. So it's not as ingrained. So in that way, we see that there's always an opportunity for more, and unfortunately, not all leaders are up to the task. Yes.
And many of the listeners, obviously, it would be great you guys to go check out Think and see if that might be something for you. But if we look at percentage wise, how many of the listeners will get a chance to join a school like this? Probably not a huge percentage. Hopefully, there'll be more and more. But I wonder, beyond that, what would be a recommendation for the aspiring leaders out there? Maybe the young entrepreneurs who are coming into business now, in terms of what would be some tools, ideas, practices they can do in order to start gaining self awareness.
Yeah, I think, well, it might be good to, even before we go to tools, to talk about like what is self-awareness, right? And why self-awareness? Because if we look at leadership, self-awareness is one aspect of it. But I think the first job to do as a leader is to figure out, like, and not just go on a first course, but it's like, what are the things I need to build? And so doing a little bit of problem analysis before solving the problem. Einstein famously said, if I have an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes identifying and understanding the problem, and then 5 minutes solving it. So I think even before we go to what can you do, apologies. The question is, what do I need to do? Who do I want to become? Or where do I need to grow, or where do I want to grow? So I think that's the first thing almost to start exploring. So I don't know if you want to go into that, but I think that might be helpful.
Hmm. Assessing and recognizing what are the gaps, and starting
Yeah.
from there. And by the way, the title of the episode, why leaders need to grow their operating system, their OS, something that you and your team suggested, and I actually love it. But I want you to maybe explain, elaborate on that.
No, I'd
Maybe
love.
just mhm.
So I think firstly, leadership is if I want to think about how do I need to lead, there's at the highest level two ways to think about that. The first way is I can only lead in so many ways. I'm born a different person than you, right? You have a different life experience, you have a different DNA, you have a different, all sorts of things that are different. And there's only so many authentic ways I can lead. Of course, I can change them a little bit and I can grow a bit, but for example, I'm maybe a little bit more conflict avoidant. So I will never be the general or the in the army, blah, 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 shouting. That will not be my leadership style. And that might be helpful in certain contexts. Now, for you, that's different as well. So there's one thing is we know that leaders who lead authentically, that they're more effective. We know that. People love following leaders who are authentic, and without followers there's no leadership. So authentic leadership is one part. It's like how and that you need to discover a little bit, who am I and how do I want to lead. Then the second part is, what's the context I lead in. So leadership is not a thing in itself that you need to do. It's always for a specific purpose, to realize something. Now, if I lead um, in a company that's growing very fast, think some of the tech companies, I need to lead differently than a company that's actually in decline, or a company that's almost going bankrupt. We call that distress management or something like that. That requires different leadership. So the context forces you to adapt a little bit. If the company is slowly growing 2% every year, and that's kind of the company, then that requires you to be really effective and managing the processes and optimizing. Whereas if you're growing double or triple digits, then it's constantly reinventing and redesigning. That requires something different. If you're all the way at the early stage of some of the entrepreneurs who are listening, right, then it's constantly shifting and pivoting to find your product market fit. That requires a lot more strategic thinking. So there and a real flexibility for making mistakes. If you're leading an actuary department in a big financial institution, maybe making mistakes is not the highest list on the list of priorities, right? Or if you're leading the people in a control tower of an airport, making mistakes is probably not something you want too much. So the context is the second thing that defines. Now, who are you is something that is relatively static. People develop over time, but that you can find out yourself. Then the context, you can ask a little bit like, how is today different from how it used to be? Because we're a lot talking about what's different in leadership today, what's new, how do we why is the world before we went on, you and I were talking about the Gen Y and the Gen Z, and does that mean that we need to live differently? And what we see is that in the context, things are changing. Now, the problem with things that are changing is it's very hard to predict the future, but the easiest thing to predict is the things that stay the same. Luckily, a lot of stuff stays the same also in leadership. In leadership, a lot of stuff has been same throughout the ages, right? You need to have, you need to be a little bit smart, right? You need to have some level of IQ. And that was no different for the president of my country than it was for Cleopatra ages ago, right? You probably need some level of charisma. And again, that's no different today versus 500 years ago. You need to be able to make decisions. So there's some stuff that stays constant. But if we think about what's different, then there is a paradigm shift in our context. We've shifted, and that has been going on for a long time, from an industrial age to more of a knowledge economy. We shifted towards a situation where everything is bigger, more global, and more interconnected. Our organizations are bigger than they ever were. Nowadays, there's barely any bakery in a small town. It's always a chain, right? Most of the companies are like at least throughout the whole country, if not in many countries or global. Our networks are interconnected. Our supply chains are interconnected. If I take just a pencil on my desk here, right? There's probably thousands of people who were involved in making some small part of that, right? If you trace the whole supply chain, there's probably 15 countries involved, right? To get to a pencil. So everything is bigger, more global, more connected, which means that we need to deal with way more stakeholders. And finally, I think the third thing that's different in this day and age is that we solve for more objective functions, if you will. We used to solve in organizations. And when did we start organizations? In my country, it was when we wanted to push out the water. I live in the Netherlands, right? So as a family, you couldn't build a dike and a windmill. Because you need a dike and then you need a windmill to to pump the water out. You couldn't do that alone as an individual. You couldn't do that as a family. So you had to create some sort of organization with a couple of families around you to create a little bit of dike and windmill. Then later, we wanted to sail further. Obviously, those were the times the colonial times. A lot of things that we're not very proud of. But the goal that we had then was to sail further and to adventure further. You couldn't build on your own a big ship of God knows how expensive that was. So you had to create some way of organizing. So the first reason we built organizations was just to solve a bigger problem. At some point it came in that we said, and we want to make some money of that. But that was a relatively narrow objective function. And over the past 100 years or so, we've become more and more narrow on that objective function. It was only about making money. Right now, we're in a day and age where it's not just about making money. We're figuring out that actually back to the SDGs, or however you want to think about that, ESG, we have a broader objective function. We say, no, it's not just about making money. We need to take care of our people. We need to take care of the environment. We need to take care of our supply chain. We need to be responsible. And there's many ways of talking about that. So our objection function has changed as well. Now, if you take those three things, moving to a knowledge age, being bigger, more connected, more global, and having more objective functions, then the implication is that it's getting more complex. Now, we all feel that. We all feel that the world is getting more complex, or very often we do so. And when I use the word complex, I'm actually trying to be, I'll try and make that very specific, because that word for me means something very specific. The way we thought in the industrial age about a company was, we thought a company was complicated. A company was like a machine. You could analyze it into its subparts, right? We had automation, industrialization, factorization, all of these things where we've broken a complex thing down into very small steps on a conveyor belt, almost like how we made a car and how Henry Ford invented building cars. And that analogy is still with us. Still today, when we think about organizations, very often we think about a machine. We talk about organizations as inputs, outputs, effectiveness, efficiency, human resources, all these things. And yet, that doesn't quite work, because the analogy of a machine means that there's a very clear relationship between cause and effect. Cause and effect are relatively close in time and in space. I'm Dutch, so let's use a Dutch example, a bike.
Okay.
On a bike ride, if I pedal one turn, I can calculate how far I drive. And I mean, in a Tesla, it's a bit more complicated to calculate how many kilowatts drive out, but still you can calculate it, right? The relationship between cause and effect is very clear. In a Tesla, in a Xerox machine or a copier, or even in a rocket ship, it's all understandable. But the analogy in this different world, in this industrial, in this knowledge age that is bigger, more connected, and where we have more objective functions, is maybe more like a rainforest. Where in a rainforest, the relationship between cause and effect is quite far, both in time and in space. If today I remove a flower, in 5 weeks, a monkey over there might die. But why is a little bit hard to figure out, right? There's these weird feedback loops. There's like exponential trends, and there's tipping points, and there's all these things. And it's very hard to truly explain why stuff happens. In hindsight, it's easy to explain, but up front, we don't know, right? In the same way that in hindsight, there were a lot of people who explained why Baby Shark To Do became a hit. But nobody afterwards created another Baby Shark To Do. So it's nice and descriptive, but it's not prescriptive. So the implication of these changes is that the world is getting more complex rather than complicated. More of a rainforest analogy than a machine analogy. Now, if that's true, and if you buy into everything I just said, then it means that you need to start leading differently, right? So the context has changed. Therefore, you need to lead differently. You need to recognize complexity. It's not always complex. We logged into this cool platform here. That was just pushing a button, and we both knew that pushing the button would bring us in, right? That's simple. And some stuff is still like a machine. I still have a phone, and it's like a machine. Now, not every problem is complex, but you need to recognize as a leader when things are complex, and then adjust the way you approach that problem. If a problem is complicated, if it's just a machine, you can sense, analyze, response. You can try and figure out what is the problem, analyze the data, come up with a little plan, execute on the plan. This is what we both learned at school, right? It's the scientific method. You analyze the data, come up with a plan, execute on the plan. If the problem is more like a rainforest, you need to try something, see what happens, adjust. Very different way of working. All the entrepreneurs listening know this, right? They're going to be pivoting and piloting and trying. Um, but recognizing when things are complex is really important. Um, it means that also the way we think about hierarchies in organizations, if stuff becomes more and more complex, then hierarchies probably break down, because hierarchies are a little bit this machine analogy where we break a thing into its subparts, analyze it, tell every subpart what to do, and then we pray that the end result will be good. And we start seeing that that doesn't always work. So what does that mean? And then we get to your, I'm taking a bit of a long-winded road. I'm noticing to your question, but then it does mean that you need to have more soft skills, taking people along. So we get back to this notion of why soft skills might be important. You need to be less steering, more empowering, and you need to what we call upgrade your operating system. Now, what does that mean? Um, um, if you need to hold more complexity, that's not necessarily something that you're born with. It is not necessarily that you're born with the ability to hold all that complexity. What do I mean with that? As a human being, we develop in very distinct stages. You can just see steps that we all go through. So for those of us that have or know children or have ever seen children, which is probably most of us, we know that when they grow up, there's something that happens to them that they love. Things appearing in their line of sight, disappearing, appearing, right? Any baby that you put something in front of them, you take it away, and it comes back. They're like, "Ooh, surprise!" And you can repeat that 1,000 times. Why is that? Because their way of interpreting the world, their way of seeing their world, their operating system assumes that they are the world. So when something appears, it becomes them. It becomes the word. It's a magical thing. They don't realize yet that they are not the world, but they are part of the world. And there's other objects in the world that you can manipulate. So at a certain point, they start noticing, oh, I can manipulate this object. And then it becomes fun to throw it on the ground. And as a parent, you get a bit annoyed because they do that with the food and with everything. They toss it on the ground. But the thing is, they learn that all of a sudden that they are not the world, but the world has all these objects in it. So they start encompassing more complexity and start playing around with it and discovering it. At that point, they're not yet able to see that their emotions are something that's also an object in the world, in a sense. So as a adolescent, or when you're in puberty, you are your emotions, right? And when you're a kid, you are your emotions. I am angry, therefore I hit my brother. I am hungry, therefore I steal the cookie from my sister. Um, and at a certain point, we all graduate somewhere at the end of puberty into the world with an operating system where we know we can postpone our emotions for the benefit of the tribe, which is a huge invention for our species. If you think about it, we can postpone our emotions. So I'm not going to steal your sandwich. Therefore, we can collaborate. We as a species are huge at collaborating. Very cool. We can do stuff together because we postpone some of our own needs for the benefit of the needs of the tribe. And whether the tribe is the town, your family, the team you're part of, the company you're part of, doesn't matter, right? Now, 75% of adults is in this level of operating system, the level of operating system where they can postpone their own needs for the benefits of the tribe. In that operating system, we sometimes call it operating system 3.0, or we call it socialized mindset. In that operating system, your image of the world is I'm either part of the tribe or I'm not part of the tribe. So there's a constant, like, almost a board of advisors at the back of your head saying, am I doing the right thing for the tribe? Am I still allowed to be part of the tribe? Do they like what I do? So constantly you're trying to please the tribe, and again, whatever that tribe may be. At some point, less than 25% of adults, or about 25% of adults, grow out of this operating system and grow into or upgrade their operating system to a place where they can say, maybe the world is not completely black and white. You're not just in the tribe or out of the tribe. Maybe there's my own way of doing things. Maybe there's not just the needs and vision and mission and strategies of the tribe, but I can define my own mission, needs, strategies. I can become a change maker, right? I can push some of my own agenda. And this is where the really cool and sometimes slightly aggressive, but change makers stand up, the people who really make stuff happen, the Musks of the world, possibly, who against all odds just push for their own vision, even if people don't like it. Now, it's very hard to judge on the outside in what operating system people are, so don't take me too literal on the Elon Musk example. Then there's one more step in upgrading your operating system. So this step, this is what maybe 20% of adults can be in, or is called self-authored, or operating level 5. Then there's one more level, operating level 4. And then there's one more level 5, which we sometimes call self-transforming. And there's many people have described this in slightly different wording. And there's only a couple percent, at best 5% of people who are in this operating system. Different studies show slightly different numbers, but it's low single digits. And these self-transforming people are able to not just say there's black, there's white, and there's gray in the middle, but these people deeply understand that black only exists because white exists, and white only exists because black exists. Which means you become a little bit softer to the people who don't want to change because they have to be part of this thing. Which means you can start making change in a slightly softer way. Which means you can truly drive change in a really fast-paced and forward manner, while also acknowledging and still embracing the fact that not everybody's already ready for it, or not everybody plays the same role in the system. So this is what we call upgrading your operating system. And at every level, you can hold more complexity. You can just hold more. Now, sometimes I describe this as onion rings. So we're not just at one level. Sometimes we're pulled down. Sometimes we're still that person who screams and who just takes the cookie of their brother, right? Sometimes that just happens under stress. Happens to all of us. But at some point, you can grow out of this. And in order to deal with this increasing complexity in the world, you need to start upgrading your operating system. There's a little bit of research on lasting transformations in organizations. And none of those, if you describe a lasting transformation as a transformation was started and a bunch of years later, it was still there, and the system didn't completely veer back. There's nobody at operating level 3.0 or socialized mindset that manages to do a lasting transformation. Just doesn't happen. So you need to have a more complex operating system in order to create lasting transformations, which is what's needed today in the world. So it's a long-winded story to say that one of the things we all need to do as leaders is to upgrade our operating system.
So let's maybe go practical here. By the way, first of all, listening to you, I was really thinking about the Matrix, the movie, kind of like the metaphor of getting out of the Matrix.
Yes.
Um, but I wonder. Okay, great. This is a great framework. I wonder, maybe what are the obstacles for us as humans? What are the obstacles of resisting to upgrade and to go to a higher level? And how can we jump to a higher level? Maybe you can elaborate on that.
Absolutely. Well, there's three things that help upgrade to a higher level. And by the way, upgrading sounds like it's all better. At each of those level has its own beauty. There's something really beautiful about that child who's surprised every time, right? And sometimes I would love to be that child again. So there's something really beautiful about every level, and going up in levels makes you more effective. It's not by no means guaranteed that it makes you happier. Um, but if you want to lead organizations, at some point it's needed. There's three things that help do so. We call them heat experiences, elevated sense making, and divergent perspectives. So, heat experiences, if you push yourself into situations where a lot is new and it's not complete, I mean, and you don't get into a freeze mode, right? There's stuff where heat experience or go overboard. But think, for example, a new job, a new role, becoming a parent. But also, we know this from uh, intense, heavy, or negative life experiences. There's You might have had stuff in your life where you said this was really rough. Think a divorce or losing somebody or something like that. And we sometimes say it was really rough, but I got better from it, or I gained something from it, or I became a better person because of it. That's growing through a heat experience. These heat experiences, they can happen to you. You can seek them out as well. We design them actively in our programs. Then elevated sense making, and you ask what's an obstacle. Is not comfortable to go through a heat experience, right? I mean, I've had people who had very intense diseases, and myself, I had my fair amount of hospital visits, and they made me into who I am. They allowed me to grow, but none of them was very fun. So seeking out heat experience is not only a fun thing. Then elevated sense making is about taking time to reflect and make sense. We sometimes say people learn from experience. It's not really true. People learn from reflecting on experience. So, taking time out to truly reflect, and sometimes for some people they do that on their own. Think about journaling, meditation, just walking and reflecting. There's many ways of doing that. Some people love doing that with others. Uh, for me, these kind of conversations help to think about, force me to reflect on what did I do, because you ask me questions. Um, so that's the second thing, reflection. So finding some kind of reflective practice that works for you, and then finally, different perspectives. Seeking out new perspectives, seeking out things that really are opposite from how you think or different from how you think. Like, I actively make time in my week to talk to people who are not in my field. And that can be artists, right? I have a couple of artist friends that I spent a lot of time with, or architects, but it can also be people in completely different fields. I have a lot of people writing me like, I'm in the same field, shall we talk? I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm more interested to talk to you because you're in a slightly different field than mine. You're also slightly in the same, but um, so seeking out different perspective is really helpful. It's also something we don't naturally do. We love sticking in our own tribe, so that's the hurdle there, or the thing.
By the way, just a side note, I remember in his book Principles, Ray Dalio was offering an example of Warren Buffett, who loves to bring his biggest critics of the company to the board meetings, to so they can question and criticize and come from a completely different angle, because if you only get the supporters, right, you might miss out on some very important information.
Yeah, but it's much nicer to have fans in your audience than critics, right? It's not easy to do this. It all sounds great, but if I think about those meetings where my biggest critics are there, those are not easy meetings, and I don't like them much, right? So it takes real courage and stamina to seek this out. Yeah, I love that example.
Yeah,
Raises my
but also, I mean, maybe for those listening who are, in the business world, entrepreneurs, maybe a good reminder. Sometimes we're so busy doing stuff, and this podcast is called Productivity Mastery. It's about getting things done and being productive. But part of being productive is creating space for conscious reflection.
yeah.
I mean, if you can create those, from top down, right? Like creating different rituals in where teams can come together and look into how did the week go, how did we do on the meetings, why did we lose this project and this pitch, like also the mistakes, like elaborating on the negative experiences or the not so pleasant experiences and talking about them freely, compounded over time. This brings a lot of great learnings and makes people stronger.
Yeah, I love how you say that. And in this analogy of the firm as a machine, efficiency has become way too important of a word. And sometimes we define efficiency of maximum amount of volume of output by minimum input. And very often it's not about volume of output. There's very few, for most leaders, it's not about volume, it's about quality. So it's much more about effectiveness than efficiency. But intuitively, sometimes we still measure ourselves on did we do all our emails right? Did we have enough volume of decisions? Whereas if you ask, it's a funny exercise. Ask any leader, how many decisions do you make a year and how many really count? The amount of decisions leaders make is ridiculous. It's hundreds, for some it's thousands. And the amount that count, most leaders I've asked can count the really important decisions on two hands, if not one, per year.
And now think about how many of those decisions we don't have the space to really think them through, because there's so many other decisions we allowed to our agenda and calendar to make. So this major strategic big move, we don't have the space to make a very good decision,
Yeah,
very effectively to look at it. And
yeah, yeah, yeah. It also makes me think of this notion of pause. Of what's the guy who wrote Seven Habits? He wasn't in our podcast.
uh, no, Seven Habits, I think he passed away some years
Oh,
ago. Stephen
oh yeah.
Covey. Stephen
Oh,
Covey.
Covey. Yeah. No, yeah.
Mm.
No. But Covey writes about one of the habits is sharpening the saw, right? So to this story of a wood chopper who's just chopping wood as fast as he can, and every day he's chopping less trees, and another guy is taking a lunch break every day, a big lunch break, and is not chopping as fast, but chopping way more trees. And at some point, the first guy learns from the second that over lunch he's actually sharpening his axe, right? And what do we do as leaders? I wonder, what do you do as a leader to sharpen your axe, to take time out to reflect, but also to learn to go on progress?
Mm.
Because it can't be easy, right? You're running a podcast, you're running a business. What do you do?
No, for sure, man, for sure. To me, I mean, let me start from beginning, right? You talk about self awareness, knowing your style, knowing how you operate. Um, to me, is creating space for this type of reflection. So, for example, um, I would have my quarterly kind of goals, but I'm also flexible because I know in my industry things are changing super fast. So I
Yeah.
have this mindset of I'm outcome focused, outcome driven, but free of outcome as well. So we can always flex and get there. So I'm starting with the goals, which could be on the team basis, and then my individual goals connected to this. And then one thing that really helps me is being clear what my priorities are. What do I mean by priorities? Okay, these are the goals, but then I want to say, what are the top three priorities at this very moment for me? And that could be launching our new book. Now we have a new book coming up, right? So that's falling into top three. Preparing and delivering greatest value for my customers. I will be going on the road for 2 weeks, delivering keynotes, workshops. So I'm spending quite a bit of time preparing the content, adapting, adjusting, right? Um, so growing and coaching my team. Okay, these are the top three priorities, and I need to constantly update them. Like next week, I'm gonna ask myself these questions because I do on a weekly basis have an hour with a cup of coffee or hot chocolate. I like to make it cozy with some nice music, and and it's just me with myself. I have a meeting with myself to elaborate on the week. I do it individually. Then we have the same kind of similar team practice. So I ask myself, what did I achieve this week? I ask myself, what did I fail to achieve and why? Uh, what were the key learnings from the week? Oh, I was with a meeting with Mark. He suggested this thing about these levels. I need to read a book about it. Okay, and then what are some new opportunities that came around? Oh, I meet this person, and she suggested I get in touch with. Okay, great. This is a great opportunity. So elaborating on this first individually, but then we have a team call. I have a small team, less than 10 people. So together we'll have a weekly call where everybody will share the reflections so we can exchange learnings. We can freely talk about the mistakes as well.
Mm.
I don't want my team to be afraid to say, "Oh, I messed up," because I mean I mess up all the time, you know. So it's totally fine if they do as well. But
Yeah.
we can talk about that and learn from that, and this is a great thing. So that's something else that I do in individually. So I have the weekly planning. Now, if we go into David Allen, another great author, who's, by the way, coming back to the podcast on the 17th of June. David Allen,
Oh,
the author of Getting Things Done. Now he
yeah.
have a new book called Team, together with his co-author, I think his name is Edward Norton. So they'll be both guests on the podcast. But you know, any book you take about productivity or time management, somewhere in the book we will find something around whatever you do. You need to know what's your intention. You need to clarify what is your intention. You know, what's the outcome of the meeting you're joining? You go to a holiday. What is your outcome? What is your desired outcome?
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do, first of all, on an individual basis, I want to be intentional about the results I want to generate professionally and personally. Um, and then I build it backwards, right? If I'm joining a meeting and my goal of the meeting is to convince the client to sign a contract and to get me on board as a trainer, if that's my outcome, then based on that outcome, I'll brainstorm and generate ideas. What can we do to maximize the probability for achieving this outcome? Well, I have to prepare, I have to do this. So every day I'll spend 20 to 30 minutes, and people get shocked. 20 to 30 minutes. How do you do that? Aren't you busy? I'm super mega busy. But if I don't create space for sharpening the axe, I'm going to waste a lot of energy and time and resources. So I need to build these habits. So I have a very specific kind of a step-by-step process where firstly I'm looking at my goals, looking at my priorities, and I start generating ideas. How can I spend my time? Then I make a big list, usually of 40, 50 items, tasks, meetings, ideas. And then I start grouping them together, identifying the outcome of each thing. Um, instead of follow up with leads, maybe it's going to be send an offer with an intention to close the contract for this amount of money. Okay, cool.
What I love about this is you're already in this showing the different approaches between some problems of yours are complex and some are complicated, right? Some what's complicated, a machine analogy, is you if a client wants to engage you, is to figure out how you really do this. And you say, okay, I gather some of the data, I analyze the data, make a plan, and I execute on it. That's a complicated problem. It's not easy, but it's relatively doable. Then there's getting your company and pushing your company further, It's a complex problem. And there you really probe sense response, right? You try something, you see a week after, does that go well? Maybe I adjust. So you're much more flexible, much more entrepreneurial in that approach, in the more rainforest analogy kind of problem of building your company. So you really, and I think that's what I'm saying. As a leader, you need to be versatile
Mhm.
in one, recognizing which one of those is a complicated and which one is a complex problem. Because if you're back in the days when I was at university, when we were thinking about startups, we had the what we call, where you now have startup boot camps and accelerators and incubators and all that jazz. We used to have business plan competitions. And the idea behind the startup was write an 80-page plan of how you're going to get this startup to success, including risks and mitigations. I mean, it was complete nonsense. It was a sense, analyze, respond, a machine analogy answer to a complex problem which you need to attack, probe sensor response. And we now know this, and we know that you try something, you see how the market responds and your clients respond, you pivot a little bit, you adjust, and slowly but surely you navigate your way towards the goal that you're constantly sharpening, right? I love that.
And by the way, again, coming back to what you shared at the beginning of the conversation, right? Like what works for me, it's probably not going to work for somebody else.
Mm.
Um, I'm an extremely creative person. My background is movie production. I love storytelling. I come up with ideas every minute. So I found a way to tame my creativity and create structure around it, because otherwise I'm going to be everywhere. I get excited about stuff very easily. So I need to be a little bit more disciplined and strict and say, hold on a second, what are the exact goals and objectives you are having, the most important ones that you consciously decide you want to get done, produce. Okay, good. And then it helps you to be able to say no better, because these are my priorities. Great idea, not really high importance when it comes to achieving these objectives.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. And indeed, yeah, it's extremely personal. And that comes back to then your first question, like where do I go as an entrepreneur or as a listener here if maybe I don't have time to go to think or any other school, right? There's plenty of good institutions in the world. But at first, uh, there's two things you need to do: is figure out who am I and how do I want to learn, and how do I want to grow. So that whole self-awareness, there's many ways to do this. It's just talking with folks, it's reading books. There's plenty of great books on self-exploration. There's online courses galore, and there's practices like meditation or breath work or all of that, and different things work for different people. But figuring out yourself, you can have a coach, you can have a psychiatrist, you can have a mentor. There's all kinds of people who can help you figure out who am I really. And sometimes it also helps to just ask your friends, right? um, and then you need to define, like, okay, what does the context require from me? Because your context is you run a startup or a company, right? But not a multinational firm. So given that you don't run a multinational firm, you have a specific type of requirements of you. Your team is not 40,000 people. So that requires something different from you to for you to lead. So what does that really mean, and what's the industry that I'm in, and what does that industry require from me? So there's a little bit of reflection there. And once you get clear on, okay, maybe for some people that means they need to become a little bit more strategic. So strategic thinking. Now all of a sudden, when you know that, you can Google your way to all kinds of courses, books, whatever you want. If you think that maybe you need to be more effective in empowering your team, because that's really important in your context. Hey,
Yeah, that's another one, right? Because I can be extremely effective individually, but as somebody who has to lead and manage people, it's my responsibility that they're productive, right? So I need to create the conditions for them to be productive, which might mean allowing for a lot more buffer time to be able to coach, to feedback, to be there for them, to help them out. So this kind of a decision making on how do I allocate my mental energy and time effectively. It's a, it's a work in progress.
Yeah, yeah. It's so really thinking through what's most important in my context and where then is my biggest gap, then leads quite fast to, okay, where do I go? Um,
And Mark, since the time is running, I have one question that I think many people might benefit from. We touched upon it a little bit. You mentioned different leadership styles and mm, talk about self awareness, but maybe I just want to hear your opinion here. Many people are reading books, they're following famous entrepreneurs or business leaders, and I've been guilty of that, trying to be like somebody else,
hmm.
right? I'm watching public personality on entrepreneur, and I'm trying to lead like they do. So my question is, where is the fair balance between getting inspired by role models, but also not taking things, you know, completely for granted, but adapting them for our own personality? Can everybody be a leader?
I don't know if everybody can be a leader. You can sure there's some nature and some nurture in there. For some people, is is not the best position for them. But assuming you want to be a leader, and or assuming you have to be a leader, in all cases, it's great to learn from others and to take lock stock what they do is extremely dangerous. So indeed, and we talked about this already a little bit. We know that people follow people who lead authentically. So there's many great books on how to lead. I've got one here. It's a book by a guy called Frank Slootman. He ran a company called Snowflake and Pit Up. It's a very specific way of thinking about how to lead. He's been extremely successful in leading like that. It's very different from how Jack Welch ran GE under him. It's very different from how Satya Nadella runs Microsoft right now, or how the folks at Patagonia lead their company and how I lead my company. So there's a lot of research that shows. There's thousands of books that show what the things are that you need to do to lead. But if you really do the research, you find out that the best way to lead is to lead the way you can lead. So something that's close to you. And again, to take just this example of this book that somebody recommended the other day, um, uh, I cannot lead the way Frank leads because it's not in me. Frank has extremely high energy, is a little bit more like a drill sergeant. That's not who I am. Um, for him, it worked, huh? And he's way more successful. He's been way more successful than I've ever been. And yet, I cannot copy him. I can take elements from him. So I think, um, and if you're studying leaders and reading books like this, read more of these books of people who do it completely different, so that you realize that there's many ways to be successful, and then do a lot of work to figure out which way is possible for you to do. And if you don't know, your friends do. The people who know you, the people you lead, they know when you're not authentic and when you are authentic. As human beings, we have a sixth sense for that. I don't know why. Apparently, that was genetically important. But I mean, if you see somebody who's not authentic, who's not their true self, you immediately know it.
Yeah,
Uh,
and if you want to grow as a leader, to me it's a commitment. It's a commitment. Like every day is like a learning ground. You can do self-reflection, you can do it through experience, trying things out, experimenting, and then you sit down and you self-reflect. You get feedback and you're not defensive, but you actually get it as data and see the useful stuff. You read books, you listen to podcasts like this one, you sign up for schools like Think, right? It's a commitment, it's a never-ending journey.
Yes, absolutely. Great leaders are students of leadership.
That is a great way to, to wrap up this episode. But Mark, before we do, final question from me
Yeah.
is, what are you excited about these days? You know, you've been in the field for quite some time. What is your vision? What are you excited about these days?
What I'm most excited about is something we're working on now, which is seeing. So the work we do is extremely experiential, and again changes people's mindset. It doesn't just give them more information like the stuff you can get from a book, but really helps people change from within, so that it's lasting. Um, and unfortunately, that service is not. I mean, it's very hard as an economic model to get right, and it's really expensive. So people who come to us have to pay a lot of money and have to have the ability to fly, and so it's very, very inaccessible. The it's for the 1%ers or 2%ers or 5%ers or what have you. So my real excitement is bringing this to everyone, making it accessible for near to nothing. So we're working on something to do that, and I'm super excited. We're now in this in a time where we're testing this and really speaking to large NGOs and other governments, foundations, people who are trying to do something good in the world, and we're trying to give them these experiences at an extremely low cost, or so at a price where cost is no longer the barrier. That obviously involves some digital stuff, and I'm super excited about the journey that we're on with this.
Fabulous. And how could people get in touch with you and learn more about the school?
So the school can be found on think.org, thnk.org. Think without the I, because there is no I in leadership. And if you Google my name, you'll find me everywhere. And you can always email me. My name is Mark with a K, and if you put an @ there and then thnk.org, you'll find me as well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mark, for this super insightful conversation. Thanks, everybody, for staying with us to the end of the episode. I just want to remind everybody who's listening live or listening to the episode now, we're bringing in a few days from now, June 3rd from 6 p.m. Central European time. We're going to have Guy Kawasaki, another celebrity coming to the podcast. So make sure to tune in live on LinkedIn or listen to the episode on your favorite podcast platform. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Productivity Mastery on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or any other major platform. So we're going to keep bringing you exceptional people like Mark to expand our perspective, help us upgrade our operating system. Thank you so much, and see you once again in the next episode of Productivity Mastery.
Thank you so much. This was a joy.
Cheers, Mark.